Welcome again, everyone. This is the RGI Best Practice webinar, Building a Shared Understanding of the Energy Transition Between Industry and Civil Society. And we're co-organizing this webinar with the French Transmission System Operator RTE and the French environmental NGO FNE. And this is kindly supported by the LIFE program of the European Commission. And the context for this webinar is that we live in a time in which efficient grid planning is more important than it has ever been. Scarcity, not just of space, but also other resources, has become a major issue over the last few years and especially months. And we need to become better at scaling up and speeding up the implementation of the needed energy infrastructure that includes renewables generation, and specifically also grids that we're talking about today. And in order to deal with this issue, we need to bring all the relevant knowledge and capacity together as quickly as possible. And in this context, RTE has kindly offered to share their approach of planning the grid for the future, how they cooperate with regional stakeholders to develop efficient spatial plans, and especially how they utilize the knowledge they gain via the cooperation with French environmental NGO FNE, who, as I said, are also a co-organizer of this webinar. So very welcome to our co-hosts here as well. And this process that they're going to present, I think, is urgently needed everywhere to make sure that all relevant energy and nature stakeholders share a similar vision of our energy future that they can then work towards together jointly, instead of possibly antagonizing each other in the process. So I'm very happy that we're able to have this conversation today. And what does it mean we have this conversation today? This is our specific agenda for this webinar. So right now we're in the welcome and introduction part by myself. I'm Stefanie Betia. I'm the communication program manager at RGI, the Renewables Grid Initiative. And I'm going to hand the word over to my colleagues from RTE and FNE, Stephanie Huyn and Michel Dubromel. And they are going to talk about improving the integration of local stakeholders' expectations by specifically looking at the example of regional cooperation in France in a program they call, and I can't pronounce it in French, but S3RENR. And they're going to give a short intro presentation, and then you will have all the time that you want to ask questions about how they set up this program, how they set up the consultation, what did they learn, how did everything work, so that you get a real understanding from the people who implemented this on how they did it, and what they can recommend for others who want to attempt something similar. And then this will be followed by a presentation by Olivier Leboy, energy expert at RTE, who will share with you their energy pathways to 2050 study, and also specifically look at the stakeholder engagement process that also very prominently included FNE. And then you will have the opportunity again to ask all the questions that you've always wanted answered on this. And then if we still have time left at the end, we can open up to a more general Q&A on both practices. But we'll go with the time management as allowed by the questions that all of you have. So if we need the 1.5 hours that we've allocated for this, we'll use it. If you have less questions, we can also close a little earlier. But of course, we would be happy if you engaged as much as possible. Some quick housekeeping so that everyone knows that we are recording this webinar specifically for the purpose of making it available for anyone who wants to get an overview of the process that will be shared here today later on. So this will be available for consumption on our website going forward. Because we want to have a conversation with all of you, it would be great if you, in the name function of Zoom, actually put your first name, last name, and the organization that you're representing here today, so we all know who we're talking to. And generally, we would like to see you specifically for the Q&A portion of this webinar. So please use your video, but please mute yourself when you're not speaking. And if you want to ask a question or have a comment, just raise your hand or write in the chat. Yeah, I think that's it for housekeeping. Specifically on RGI. I think most of you here know us, but very quickly as to who is organizing this webinar. So RGI is, I would say, a unique collaboration of NGOs and TSOs from across Europe. And we've been working together to discuss and working on implementing the renewables-based energy system of the future, together with our members, transmission system operators from across Europe, and environmental and climate NGOs from across Europe for over 10 years now. And in this context, yeah, the sharing of best practices is a big pillar of our work. We collect best practices from the members that you've seen in the previous slides, but also very much beyond this. And we do this mostly via our Good Practice of the Year award, but we always try to share them through many channels. So sharing them via a best practice webinar like we're doing today is one of the most important things, because it allows a lot of people to ask very detailed questions on how to copy something to a different context, or just to understand what others across Europe do. So yeah, we're hoping that you take a lot away from this, and yeah, that you keep joining our discussions, and we all, by sharing our knowledge, help make each other smarter along the way. I think that's enough on the context, and I now want to introduce the speakers that will share what they have learned in their specific projects over the last couple of years. And the first presentation, as I said, will be a joint one. We will first hear from RTE, and Stephanie will kick off the presentation on the regional cooperation. And we will then also hear a few words from FNE's Honorary President, Michel, who will complement Stephanie's presentation. And the second presentation of the day will be held by Olivier. Yeah, and with this, I think that's enough talk from my side. And Stephanie, I would like to ask you to share your presentation and kick off the best practice part of this webinar for today.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. I propose you to go straight to the beginning of our presentation. First of all, hello everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar. We are going to share with you some of the practices we have implemented with one of our main stakeholder, FNE. So first of all, a few words about RTE and FNE. Maybe Michel, I will let you start with FNE.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. Hello, everyone. The France Nature Environment is the largest federation of environmental organization in France, and this organization is the largest one, and it's dealing with more than 20 topics, 12 topics at the same time, either biodiversity, water, or energy. And this provides a good experience when we discuss with RTE. That's all for FNE. Up to you, Stephanie.
Yeah, that's a very, we make very quick presentations, but if you have some more questions at the end, we will happy to answer to it. For RTE, so we are the France's transmission system operator who has been operating, maintaining, and developing the grid for 20 years while constantly balancing supply and demand. We are a public utility which provides and competing power generation facilities with non-discriminatory access to the grid. We also inform the decisions of the public authorities who makes energy policy. and it also educates the members of the general public, helping them to gain a better understanding of electricity so that can use it more efficiently. About our partnership, we have been involved with FNE for 10 years. This joint work allows us to share views on the challenges of the energy transition and the need for adapting the public electricity transmission grid. This makes FNE aware of RTE's issues and also RTE aware of FNE issues, and this increase FNE's skills on energy and on the grid. So we reciprocally better understand our concerns, expectations and points of vigilance for the protection of nature and environment. Together, we produce support documents to better understand the environment in which electricity transmission facilities are located and the role of the grid in the energy transition. So you can see on the slide some of our realization we made together. They all are available on our websites. If we go deeper on our best practice, we are now going to present a concrete example of a consultation and awareness raising action that we have been carrying out on a regional scale since 2019 within the framework of the regional development plans, which we call S3R ENR, like you explained, Stéphanie. A few words about these plans and their role in network planning. These plans anticipate the arrival of the renewable energy production facilities and pool connection facilities. As you can see on this picture, here is what would happen if RTE did not anticipate with these plans. We can see that in areas with no reinforcement needs, we would have a lot of requests until the grid is full. In other areas, the first generators willing to connect has to pay for reinforcement, and expensive reinforcements can block some connection projects. So these regional development plans therefore provide a global overview of grid and project development projects. The main objectives of these plans are to increase the capacity to connect areas to the grid, to provide visibility of the location of future grid developments and reinforcements, to anticipate grid developments to facilitate areas developments, and to share the costs of grid developments between the generators. So the usefulness of these plans are therefore crucial. This is why it's important to anticipate and prepare the consultation with the stakeholders of the territory. At the first step of the construction of these plans, the state services set regional areas development objectives. Then RTE conducts some analysis of the grid development solutions. This allows the draft of a regional plan on the basis of which the public consultation will be conducted. Finally, the regional plan is approved by the state's regional services and it's published. Our action focused on the preparation of the consultation in order to inform our partners on the importance of collecting their opinions. We have thus solicited FNE within the framework of our partnership from the ending of the year 2019 in order to build up a shared understanding. With this joint action, our objectives were clear. First, to improve awareness of local associations about RTE's role. We could see that during these very local meetings, the FNE actors in the territory did not always distinguish the difference between the actors in charge of electricity production, transport, and distribution. This clarification was already an essential prerequisite to starting the discussions. It also improved the respective knowledge of local stakeholders of RTE and FNE. Even if RTE has a very strong culture of consultation with local players and stakeholders, these meetings enabled us to get to know people who are involved locally in renewable energy production projects. Contacts were made. We will continue during the implementation of the regional development plans. And we also capitalized on RTE-FNE national partnership. We improved environmental consideration in regional plans. We will give you, and Michel will give you some concrete examples in the following presentation. And we promoted the role of electricity transmission grid for the energy transition. So if we speak in concrete terms, this collaboration took place in the following way. First, we contacted the regional FNEs to plan meetings a few weeks before the start of the consultation in order to build dialogue between RTE and them and to clarify the justification of grid projects. This meeting led to the organization in 6 different regions with 18 written contributions received during the consultation. After the consultations process, we provided specific answers to for each question, and we worked to integrate the observations in the best way possible to the regional development plans. And to provide more information on need of the grid in the energy transition, we used the position paper written with FNE in 2020. So these meetings prior to the consultations are continuing for plans that have not yet been adopted. We can see it in 2 regions. We know that without these meetings, these contributions would have been much less numerous and less enlightened. So their usefulness is very clear for us. Michel, I will let you explain the points that FNE particularly insisted on.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. If we can proceed with this one. About the consultation process, I think it was an opportunity for FNE to apply the main guidelines that, of our policy. And I will take 2 of them. The first one that we call ARC, which is avoid, reduce, compensate. And the second one, which is reduce land use consumption. If I explain about avoid, reduce, compensate, if any infrastructure has to take place, we ask our partner, and in this case it's RTE, to avoid to destroy biodiversity. And if it's not possible to avoid, to reduce the impact on biodiversity. And if it's not possible, once again, to compensate this impact. It looks like a very painful process, but raising this question, is it possible to avoid? Will facilitate the dialogue with our partner, and it will raise questions and ask the people from RTE, is it possible to find another solution? On the other hand, from years and years, we try to reduce land use consumption. Once again, when we have to discuss about new infrastructure with RTE, we ask them, is it possible not to consume too much land use? Because infrastructure, grid after grid, will request more land use. So these are for us a good opportunity to apply and perhaps not to succeed with our request, but it's a way to discuss with RTE about that. And specific requests, for instance, in one area, people ask RTE some questions which are far beyond the commitment we have together. This region, which is in the southwestern part of France, did request RTE to have a long-term evaluation of greenhouse gases of the infrastructure. It was not planned by RTE, but it was for them an opportunity to try and make this evaluation. So once again, even when not agreed at first, it was an opportunity for RTE to have an improvement in their process. Is it possible to have the next slide, Stephanie?
Yes.
And as I explained, this dialogue is an opportunity to have a larger question than the one which are specially linked to spatial planning. For instance, this association, they are not only working on energy, they have a very broad scope of activity, and they are working either on biodiversity or renewables. For instance, they will ask to have PV photovoltaic facilities to be implemented in enterprise area. It's an example to avoid or to decrease land use consumption. And as it happens many times when we come with a new energy facilities, people will ask, is it possible to avoid? This means, is it possible to start first with energy savings? Because energy saving will avoid to have new equipment to destroy biodiversity, for instance. So these are I think it's a good case study for FNE to have education and training about the links and the partnership with a TSO. Next slide, I think it's yours, Stephanie. So, conclusion is for you.
Yes, thank you, Michel. So as you just said, the outcome of this collaborative approach is very positive, because this has allowed us to have a mutual appropriation of the issues promoted both by RTE with regional development plan issues. It has also concretely allowed the improvement of the environmental assessments. If we make a quick review of this work, stakeholders will already be identified and the dialogue will therefore become more fluid. The exchanges that will take place during next consultations will also be more informed and productive, because actors already know each other's. So we can go straight to the main topic and the main issues of the projects. it also created new possibilities of reaching the association affiliated to FNE. For the future, we see new concrete opportunities because we know how to involve more FNE affiliated associations, for example, through webinars, which are actually in preparation. And also with event like this one, webinar to value and share our best practices with other TSOs. So I think I'm done for this first part of the webinar. Thank you everyone for your attention. Michelle, if you want to say your last word, or if we go to the Q&A.
Michelle, you're muted.
Yeah. Yes, a very short comment. Up to now, we are very happy to have 6 regional federations working with RTE, as FNE is a very broad network of 900,000 associations. We would like to have 10 times or 100 times more associations involved in this process at the next step. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Michelle, and thanks a lot, Stephanie, for this very good overview presentation of how you work together on these regional plans. Very insightful, I found. Michelle, did you just say 900,000 associations or the 900,000 members that FNE has?
No, 900,000.
Okay, that's
very
quite
large one. Yeah, a very large network.
Okay, then there is indeed room for more cooperation going forward. I would like to open the floor for questions from the audience. And I know that it always takes a while for you for everyone to gather their thoughts and to come up with a few questions. I really encourage you all to think about what are the open questions that I have in context with what was presented? How could this be relevant for my own working environment? And what could I ask these experts who really have worked on implementing this in their own context that would help me going forward working on something similar? So really take this opportunity to ask the people, these experts that you have in the room that you don't always have access to ask the questions that could really help you in your own work. So I give you some time to think about this and maybe kick the conversation off with some questions of my own. So I think we've gotten a very good impression of how you as RTE and FNE work together, and it seems like you have a very trustful relationship from how you talk about the cooperation and how you talk to each other, which is incredibly nice to see. Michelle, you already said that going forward you would wish for a cooperation on an even broader level, but looking back at what you've done so far, would you generally say that, because you mentioned the concerns and the comments that you brought to the attention of RTE, would you say that in addressing those, you were happy with what came back in answer to those concerns? So do you feel like the comments that you brought to the attention of the grid developer, that those were addressed? And overall, are there, apart from enlarging the cooperation, any other possibilities to improve what you've done so far? And I mean, this is a question to Michelle first, but of course to RTE as well. Are there opportunities for improvement going forward that you see?
Yeah, thank you. I think first, we haven't got all the answers to our question, but I think this is the game. And second part of my answer, it was a good opportunity for the people to check how their request was discussed, was agreed by RTE. So I think the people, they don't feel the success as a positive result, they feel the success as a positive dialogue. And we have two major results as mentioned by Stephanie. First, people know each other. I have to tell you, we had to spend, either Stephanie and myself, sometimes calling the people, hey guys, you have to speak together. So first thing, people know each other and they know it's possible for them to speak to the other one. Second part, even if it's not successful, but I don't know what means successful, they know that it's possible for an NGO to ask a TSO some improvement about biodiversity. And this is, I say, a good result. That's it.
Great, thanks a lot. Stephanie, I would like to hear your perspective as well, and specifically also because you listed some goals for the approach in the beginning. Some of the most important were like to gain more specific regional and local knowledge and become better in considering environmental impacts of grid implementation. Do you feel like you've reached those goals, and do you see room for improvement going forward?
Yes, I totally agree with what Michelle just said. We've reached the main of our goals. It was to know each other and to speak together about these plans that they are not very known in the territory. So people don't know what is S3R, ENR, what is a regional development plan, what is made for. So that was the first objective, and I think we totally reach this. If we want to go in the details, we already talked about this in the framework of our partnership, but FNE has a specific principle of membership of associations at the regional level, and sometimes we can see that the positions of the regional and national level not the very same one. So when they contribute to the consultation, we sometimes have some difference between the official position of FNE and the affiliated association. So we can somehow discover some position, but it's also interesting because we can see that the territory is very different, the projects are different, so the concerns are not the same. We have to adapt to each actors.
Right, thanks a lot. Yeah, this is something that we hear from many of our members, that when it comes to environmental and climate groups, that not necessarily the national chapter is always fully aligned with the chapters, with local chapters. And then, of course, depending on the local circumstances, concerns can be very different. And yeah, I see how that's a challenge that, well, will need to be looked more into, or even more into going forward. You mentioned again your regional, well, spatial plans for grid and renewable development, and it doesn't specifically have to do with the stakeholder engagement approach that we're talking about today, but I wanted to just quickly draw the attention to these plans as well, because I think this is a great approach to actually work on planning both of these infrastructure needs together. And they've actually, I've just read in the last few days, been positively named by the European Commission in the context of their communication on the Repower EU. Hoping, of course, that this will be an inspiration for many across Europe for specifically like developing these regional plans, but then also the stakeholder engagement aspect of it. Do you have, for those in the webinar today, some tips on what to do when developing something like this, or what not to do? So some learnings that you have from this process that you want to share with those here today?
Michel, maybe I start.
Yeah, you start.
You complete.
I follow. No worry. Go ahead.
In my point of view, I think there are some points very important. First, to very accompany the local interlocutors in the preparation of the meetings, so that we can assure that expectations are met on both sides, because sometimes the goals of the meetings are not very clear, and so we want to be sure that the consultation for the regional development plan will be the occasion to the associations to speak freely. So it has to be very clear in the very beginning. It's also necessary to go back to the knowledge base without assuming that the actors know each other's roles. So explaining the basics of the RTE role, but also about the grid and energy transition. And for me, finally, anticipate, it's more for organization, but anticipate as much as possible to ensure that the maximum number of interested interlocutors can participate.
Great, thanks a lot. Michel, do you have something to add?
Yes, a very short comment. It's not possible to save time about that. This means there is a preliminary step where you need to implement a trust between the two parties. And as long as this trust is not implemented, it's not possible to proceed. And as mentioned by Stephanie, we need that the national partner to help the regional one. And this requests some time, and it's not possible to save any time on that. So first, a preliminary step, a good trust between the two partners. I don't say that it's easy to proceed after that, but if this trust is not established at the national level, it's not possible to proceed at the regional one.
Great, thanks a lot. I think this is a very important message to send. We have some other questions in the chat. Thanks a lot for participating, everyone. I maybe want to take Michelle Walsh from EirGrid first. Michelle, do you have the possibility to turn on your video and ask your question yourself? If not, I'll read it for you. Okay. Okay, I'm afraid not. Good, then I'm happy to transfer your question. So this is Michelle from EirGrid in Ireland, so the Irish grid operator, asking, Stephanie, could you comment on any experience that you've had in communicating and involving internal RTE stakeholders in this initiative? Many thanks. So I'm assuming this is about the company culture a little bit, and like whether well, this is something that across the board has taken more hold within RTE, the importance of stakeholder engagement. Yeah, how did this affect the company as a whole?
Yes, as I said, RTE has a strong culture of consultation. So we are used to involve stakeholders in the very early stages of the project and of the plans. So when we ask to the teams in the local level to make to establish a contact with regional FNEs, it was not like surprise or new practice, but that they didn't always know the very specific interlocutors of FNE. So we had to lead them to the good contacts, the good people, and but it was well received by the teams. Sometimes we didn't have the time to organize some the meetings, so that's why we don't have contributions in all the regions because of a lot of work of the teams or specific context about the plans. But in general, the strong culture of RTE in this approach facilitate the work, this specific work.
Okay, great to hear. Thanks a lot. I have one additional question that I'm not fully sure fits the context of what we're talking about today, but I do want to mention it. And so this comes from Robbie Morrison from the open modeling community. And he's asking about data and in the context of Repower EU, whether access to open data in relation to independent analysis, well, where this access is possible. Robbie, I'm not sure that we are the experts to ask on this topic, but please do reach out to my RGI colleagues on this question as well. And if I misunderstood and you want to clarify something, also just grab the microphone and do so.
Can I clarify?
Yes.
My name's Robbie Morrison. I'm an energy system modeler. The Repower project was mentioned. An American colleagues just put a study out 3 days ago, which uses information off the transparency platform to analyze the options for the gas curtailment in Europe. So these are really desperate questions, but we need access to legally unencumbered data, and we can't get it. We've talked to RGI, we've talked to NSOE endlessly for 5 years at every level, and we're just desperate for someone to say, let's put Creative Commons licenses on the information that we provide.
Okay, thanks, Robbie, for the comment. So I don't think something that we need to follow up in this conversation, which is more about well, it does fit the stakeholder engagement, right? In the sense that it would be good to involve the opening modeling community in the process of grid development and energy infrastructure implementation as much as possible. So a call to all the grid operators here to share as much data as possible. But for now, I would like to move on to the second presentation and already thank Michelle and Stephanie, but they will be here throughout the rest of the webinar. So if anyone has questions to them going forward, please ask them as well later on. But I now want to move from, we've heard about what's happening in the here and now and on regional and local level in the cooperation between RTE and FNE. And now we want to look a little bit more to the future and the national level. And I want to hand the word over to Olivier to talk to us about the 2050 vision of where France's energy future is going and how the process of developing the study with input from FNE amongst others, how that went and the learnings that RTE gathered from that. So please, Olivier, share your screen and go ahead.
Thank you, Stephanie. Okay.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. I'm sharing my screen. I hope that everyone can see it. First, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being present close to mid-July. I think that there's a very strong link between the presentation which has been just delivered on stakeholder engagement at local level on the way to develop energy infrastructure, electricity infrastructure, and the vision we have up to 2050, because of course developing infrastructures has always an impact, and it's very much important to understand the why of this infrastructure in order to ease the acceptation and to find the best way to have them develop in a way that will minimize their impact. But nevertheless, of course, there's an impact, but we need to understand the benefits of such infrastructure. And that, I would say, is the purpose of the energy pathway to 2050 and the focus on stakeholder engagement process. So what we are developing now, not only RTE, but also race developers are on the path of 2050. So the energy pathway to 2050, which has been released gradually between October last year and April this year, for even the February second step in the publication is a study as part of RTE public service assignment. So according to the French legal framework, we have obligation to perform adequacy studies, so checking supply and demand adequacy on a 10 to 15 year time horizon. Once every other year, we focus on the short term and the next year on the medium long term. The last big studies looking into the future was the 2017 report looking to 2035. And this time, the ministry requested to RTE to explore longer term, being 2050, because it's where we have a carbon neutrality objective as part of the Paris Agreement. And this will serve as an interim step between the existing national long-term strategy, from which stem the energy pathway to 2050, and the next one that will be released next year. So as I've said,
Olivier, may I quickly interrupt you just to say that there's a little notification from Zoom on your screen. If you could click that away, then we can see all your slides, and then I let you continue.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. So the national long-term low-carbon strategy called SNBC is the main input. It's been released in 2020, and it has some strong political assumption on the pathways to be followed by France. The first is a low-carbon electricity generation, so big ambition for direct electrification, not defining what is a mix, apart that to be low-carbon between renewable and nuclear, high national biomass production, because France benefits from, like other countries like Italy, of a large biomass potential and low energy import. So reducing very strongly the import compared to present situation. So I would say that the three political paradigms behind the figures of the national strategy. And is on that we've, on such basis that we've built the energy pathways. And when preparing the update of the national strategy, the authorities will use the energy pathways as a major input, especially for the electricity sector. So the energy pathway to 2050, in fact, it was already a pathway to come to the report, which has been released, because in fact, work has started back to 2019. So for 2 years, there was a scoping exercise to define which scenarios to be studied. In the meantime, there was a RTE IEA report on the technical feasibility of LC system with very high level or close to 100% raise share. So, but not on the benefit or challenges to have such system. It was just checking that technically it is possible. And then in 2021, the RTE teams work hard on the simulation analysis and publication of the results. It's not finished. As I've said, we support the authority in the update of the national strategy by further explaining, providing detail on the energy pathways. And there are also some follow-up studies. For example, one which is on hydrogen and power infrastructure. This is done together with GRT gas, so the main French gas TSO. There is one scenario on indoor globalization. So how to still achieve carbon neutrality in a world where globalization is on the downside, and energy also wants to be on energy saving behavior. How much citizens, consumers can facilitate the transition, not only through technical efficiency, but also adapting their behavior, being decreasing on the energy service that each person require, or adapting them to the price or to the status of the system. So during this process since 2019, we had unprecedented stakeholder engagement process. So we had 7 steering group meetings. So this is the high-level meeting where stakeholders provide the expectation at high level, where there is some arbitration between the different thematic groups. So this is touching all the is about all topics. Then we had 9 thematic working groups. So you'll see later on the next slide which are the different topics. I would say this is really here that there was some knowledge sharing between stakeholders and RTE teams on many aspects impacting the scenarios. So the steering group and working groups together, were attended by 120 stakeholders, more than 40 technical meetings of the thematic working groups, more than 1,000 pages of document during the stakeholder engagement process. And we receive, so counting the different people having answers, sometimes it's a joint answer, 4,000 answers to the public consultation. So just by that, it's a huge effort of organization, but I will come back to that. It clearly deserves such effort. In parallel to this stakeholder engagement, the CEO of RTE has established a scientific advisory body. So you can find here the name and position of the 7 members. So, you know, they are well-established academics, ranging from economists to climatologists, philosophers, because there's a lot to do about behavior that ensures somewhere the scientific quality of the report. That's a thematic workshop or streams. So one on climatic scenarios, because the study has been carried out along different global warming scenarios, impacting demand, but also the supply. Demand, electricity demand, but of course having some view of what the other energy carriers are on how they behave, because it's a lot about transfer of use. Scenario building is how to combine scenarios on demand with scenario on supply, for example. Coupling with other energy carriers, so here it was a lot about hydrogen to gas. Societal evolution, so this is a behavioral change, and also not only regarding demand, but also regarding acceptability of the infrastructure, environment, because the impact is much wider than just CO2. There is a lot about the way we use territories. There is scarce natural resources. So all these topics, flexibility, because of course, moving from a system with highly flexible power generation to a system strongly dominated by wind and solar, then flexibility is a challenge, but study with IEA has proven that it can be overcome, but nevertheless, we need to explain how. Electricity system operation and cost, and then the steering group. So you can see that what the demand is certainly a predominant item, and this can be seen also with the number of workshops, because this is what in the end is shaping the electricity system. You don't produce more than you are consuming, and you have to produce how much as you are consuming. So here, coming back to the engagement process, so it was not just on the papers that we had meetings, there were many outcomes. So here you can find 6 big items where we did things differently than initially planned, thanks, and not because, thanks to the stakeholder engagement process. So industrial onshoring, so the fact that we need to move back some industry into France, and I think that of course the COVID crisis has been a strong illustration of the merit to having some strategic production move back at national level, or at least European one. So it was a topic on which most of the stakeholders converged on, and we had significant contribution from industrial players and trade unions. And then we have created a specific demand scenario on industrial onshoring. Updated trajectories, so regarding energy saving behavior. So we started from the national strategy, and based on the discussion with stakeholders, we looked at how much we can be more ambitious in terms of flexibility, adaptation of demand, or what is the bare minimum that we can count on. So we had 4 levels of flexibility of demand. New scenarios. In the initial scenarios, we anticipated to always have some existing power plant there in 2050, and to have always some RES development. So based on stakeholder feedback, different stakeholders, of course, we have added 2 outlier scenarios. One is accelerated phase out of nuclear capacity, so no more nuclear in 2050, and some RES development moratorium, so strong slowdown of RES development. But I would say this is not the core. Both of them are not in the core of the process, but it shows that if you want to pretend, or to do more than pretending to engage with stakeholders, you need to find a consensus, and sometimes the consensus is also considering some outliers, even if in the end the consensus is done on more intermediate scenarios. We had in-depth focus on low carbon thermal power and gases, because in a world dominated by wind and solar, especially in the scenarios with no new nuclear, we still need some thermal power. But of course, we had a lot of questions from where the gas is coming. What is the gas? Is it hydrogen? Is it methane? What are the sources? So we had to develop much more our work there. The national strategy, even if published in 2020, in fact, most of the work has been done in 2018, when hydrogen was not such a hot topic. In 2020, we've seen many national and also the European hydrogen strategy. And in France, we had a national hydrogen strategy with some target for 2030. And then it appears necessary to go beyond what is international strategy and the long-term strategy on hydrogen. So we've created a hydrogen plus variant on the demand scenario. And in the end, we had also to provide some insight on some specific challenges linked to the nuclear industry. One is prolonging existing fleet beyond the 50 years, up to 60 or even more years, and small modular reactors. So this has clearly enabled us to enhance the scenario framework. I mean that based on the feedback of stakeholders, the report is more ambitious. Of course, it went with some delay compared to the initial planning, but I think that in the end, no one complained, not us, that it deserves this additional months. Nevertheless, we had some long-lasting divergences, not that much it was us with stakeholders as a community, but sometimes between stakeholders. As said before, our report, our scenarios are deeply rooted within the national long-term strategies. And you can see here a pie chart summarizing this long-term strategy in terms of evolution of the energy demand share of the carriers. So the direct electrification rate is not was not a choice, a specific assumption from RTE. It derived this 55% of direct electrification derived from the long-term strategy. The hydro energy is the same, the energy independence is the same, the low ambition in hydrogen, that's why we have added hydrogen plus scenario, and sometimes, often depends, people criticize some of the assumption as wrong choice from RTE when in fact it is a frame in which we have started. So it is something which is directly linked from the long-term strategy. So then sometimes it translates into the need of a variant, but the reference is as much as possible the national strategy. System adequacy with a very high raise share in the mix. So some people are still doubtful of some event like the Dunkelflotte, so the the winter weeks with low winds, and we've provided information on how the system goes through, and also we have in France sector supply criteria using a statistical approach according to which is consistent with European methodology, but there was an expectation to have on top of that some stress test. And of course, everyone has this rather a stress on a technology which is not its own technology. Technology is not really much in favor. So we had to add some stress tests on a rather wide range of things that could happen to the system. So 50% nuclear share as a ceiling, we've been accused to use a political ceiling, but in fact, discussing with the nuclear industry, it seems that the 50% range in 2050 is rather something which is already quite a challenge in terms of prolonging existing units and building new ones in the context of an increased electricity demand. So it's not that much political. It's true that it is the level which is until now the goal for 2035, but in fact it's more high case, industrial high case. Demand supply combination, in order to ease comparison between all the variants of the report, we always use the same reference demand scenario. So sometimes people prefer a combination of demand and generation, which is based on the storyline. So if demand behaves like that, it's very likely that the supply will move in that direction. And it's what we use in the 2017 adequacy study. But then it makes it difficult to say what if we have this demand scenario, but finally I combine it with the supply mix from another scenario, what will happen? Then we were not able to answer in 2017. So this time we went for something which is more focused on the reference demand scenario. To finish, so you can see here the 6 main generation mix. So moving from 100% raise in 2050, M0 to M23, so that the 3 main mix without new nuclear, and they can reach 100% raise in between 2050 for M0 and 2060 for M1 and M23, and the N series, which is with new nuclear, not exceeding 50% of the mix. But I would say presentation is not focusing that much on the scenarios themselves, but rather on our interaction with stakeholders. And here to finish my presentation is a key findings to enhance public and industry awareness. Okay, we have 18 key findings, but I would say from a wider perspective, I would say it's more the stakeholder engagement process than the report itself that help to build this common understanding. Not that much of what could be the 6 scenarios, because certainly with the new strategy they will move, but more to understand the challenges, being financing, industrial challenges, natural resources, to be made to reach carbon neutrality. So I think the process is even more important than the output, because it's what helps to understand the output and here, for example, that a graph from the report, first one on comparison of the cost of the different scenarios, and beyond the color bar, you see behind the gray tunnel, and that shows that that each scenario can see its cost change depending on many factors, and that the ranking is not always straightforward. Natural resources here is a copper, so just to compare, for example, what is the consumption of the power system with consumption of the electric vehicle batteries. So we see that the electricity system may not be the main source of consumption. If we want to electrify whatever we do on generation side, we'll need copper for mobility. And regarding on the right-hand side, the many industrial challenges for on the generation side being for RES and nuclear. So what we hope is that from these challenges, from the joint understanding or wide understanding that we've established together with stakeholders, that we can draw at least one short-term recommendation is when looking to 2030, 35, in fact, what we need is both RES acceleration compared to what we know today and existing nuclear lifetime expansion. These are no regret options on the short term, and we'll have new reports that will provide more insight on what could happen beyond, but it's really much where we need to make immediate progress. And we hope that this is now we've helped that stakeholders will not oppose these two aspects on the short term, because I mean, there is urgency. Thank you. Happy to answer any question you may have. I will switch off my microphone because it seems that there is some echo with my setting. And thank you once more for that.
Thanks a lot, Olivier. I think you're still screen sharing. I see myself double or 3 times actually. Great, thanks a lot. Thank you so much for your presentation. Very interesting to see what RTE is planning to the future and how stakeholders factored into this planning. Of course, there's a divergence across Europe when it comes to how big of a role nuclear should play in our energy future. But this is not what we're here to discuss, but more the stakeholder engagement aspect of things. And thanks a lot for sculpting this out so nicely in your presentation, how this factored into your learning process. And this is actually also what I want to focus on with my first question. So you said in your presentation that the process is actually more important than the output. And we've heard in the previous presentation as well that the whole process that RTE and FNE and other stakeholders have gone through for the regional planning has led to a lot of trust. And I want to ask you, apart from the specific tangible outcomes for the report, what have you learned from each other in this process, you as an RTE? And then, I don't know, Michelle, how involved you yourself were in this study, but maybe from a stakeholder perspective, what have you learned from each other, and has this actually, in your first estimation, led to this shared understanding that you were striving for in terms of the energy future?
I let Olivier start. Up to you, Olivier.
Okay. I think compared to the initial scope, the final scope is much wider. It means that one of the first things is that stakeholders want to dig deeper and wider than just see how the dispatch of the electricity system or how many lines can be built. So the thing that energy is impacting many things, and the identification or the joint identification of the scope of the things that will be impacted by the energy transition is very much valuable. I think also it helps to identify new source of expertise. Sometimes we may consider that some data or whatever are very difficult to access, but it may help sometimes to identify a good source. And also we know that we'll release new reports on security of supply or on some more focused topic, and it's easier to do so with stakeholders. We starting from a common understanding of the framework. But of course, trust is something is never achieved, something to be sustained. So somewhere, I would say, the most challenging part is it's something to be sustained on the long run. And this is not easy when we see that we need continuously to release new reports, and that when meeting stakeholder expectations, the only thing that could happen is that expectation will be higher.
I will follow with some comments, and as agreed, I don't want to comment about the outcomes. I think it's the process which is very important. And one of the comments is about the working groups that Olivier explained. At first, as FNE, we thought we had to be involved in the environmental group. And then we understood that flexibility was another issue, and societal evolution too. So when proceeding with this, we understood, as explained by Olivier, that it's a multi-criteria system, and every working group was important within this process. So for sure, this is a part of energy system in France, because it's mainly focused on electricity and hydrogen. But what we learned from that is that there is a huge difference between what is planned for 2050 compared to the past century. The past century was one fossil fuel and nothing else. And in any scenario, as explained by Olivier, we will have a mix of energy. I don't comment about the ratio, but I think this is a huge, very important thing, that we need a mix of different energies in different areas in France. And this is a huge difference between what was done during the past century. And I will agree with Olivier that all your expansion provide us many challenges to be met. And we know that we have not the answers to these challenges, because every day we have new challenges. So it's a huge difference, because now you did provide us with all this data, and it's not possible to say, hey, for this we have the solution. We know that all these challenges have to be, I will not say solved, but taken into account at the same time.
Thanks a lot. So what I hear is that it was also a learning exercise from your side, in that you now feel like you have a better understanding when it comes to the complexities of the energy system and everything that needs to be considered. It's great to hear that actually for both sides, it was an opportunity to share knowledge, but also to learn something new. And again, I want to encourage everyone here in the room. We have a relatively silent crowd today, to ask a few questions to Olivier, Michel, and Stephanie when it comes to their practices. We have like roughly 10 minutes left. So if you want to make use of this, please do, and ask the questions that could possibly help you in your own work. Olivier, I also want to, in the meantime, ask, I just now asked about the stakeholder process. This has still to do with that process, but I also want to ask on the content. You mentioned the more extreme scenarios that you considered thanks to stakeholder input. Would you say that apart from learning that this is something that stakeholders want to see considered, does this also provide from the scenario building and modeling perspective, new insights into the scenarios that you're well more likely to be planning for the actual future with? So do you gain some content knowledge there that influences the other scenarios as well, that has actually provided new knowledge for you?
I would say that first, on the value was to prove that we don't refuse to study one scenario for political and for own agenda reasons. Somewhere, the fact that we spent some time in testing such variant proof that our transparency somewhere. Now to say that they will be used, they will have the same weight in any planning exercise, I would not say so. There are outliers. I think that, as mentioned by Michel, what we know is that we need a mix. This mix has to be within, and the priority, I don't know what is reasonable range is, but every time that we bet only on one technology, I would say we increase the risk. So these outliers tend to increase the risk. Now I'm just an energy expert, not deciding on anything. And I would not say they are the core of the report. But they have the value to show our willingness to consider stakeholder feedback, not whatever it is, but when there is a certain number of people pushing for something, then we consider it.
Thanks. I would, that's better. I'm by no means an energy scenario or modeling expert, but I would say that considering a fully renewable scenario doesn't mean just concentrating on one solution, right? Within that whole.
Maybe one thing on the 100% renewable, what was asked is accelerated, so reaching in 2050. All the scenarios without new nuclear achieve 100% renewable in 2060. So learning the added, we didn't learn a lot by saying that this will happen in 50 compared to 60. I fully agree. It was very important to show that a 100% renewable system can work, and this has been proven both by the study with the IEA and on the scenarios on the 2060 point. Just to have it in 2050 does not bring a lot of additional insight. Certainly do not mean that there is no value in studying a 100% rate scenario.
To remember to unmute myself, well. Thanks a lot for this answer. Great to hear. Are there questions from the room? If not, I would just give the last word to our three speakers and just make a round once asking each of them if they have a learning or a thought that they want to leave this group with today. Doesn't need to be a long speech, just something final to give people on their way for the rest of the working day and the week. And Michelle, maybe I start with you. Is there some thought that you couldn't share today yet, that or something that you have already said but want to emphasize before we close this webinar today?
Yes, what I want to emphasize is that it is possible to work, to have a partnership between TSO and an urban association, even if we don't fully agree on 100% of the issues as mentioned by Olivier. I think the important thing is to have the dialogue and to the opportunity to exchange ideas and to have the same goals, even if we don't choose the same way. So I think it is possible to work together about energy and biodiversity. That's it. And
Great.
Thank you for this, William.
Thanks a lot. Stephanie, do you have any thought that you want to share?
I won't add anything about what Michelle just said. I totally agree. We have a lot to offer to each other about our positions, and we have to meet around the table to progress together. So we will continue with FNE, and I think it will improve our practices at every level. And thank you to you, Amara, for the organization.
Thanks a lot, and you're very welcome. Olivier, final words for you.
Yeah. I think that is one aspect, I think, which is sometimes left aside, is the importance to align between the local, national, and European level in the consultation, in the way we see things. I work a lot on the T1EP scenarios. We'll have a workshop on the 2024 edition scenario on the 20th, I think. Sometimes some stakeholders, including the TSOs, we don't always have the same positioning at different layers, and does not make life easy to anyone when there is a bit of separate direction. And I think it's also important that we work with NGOs as well as with other stakeholders, try to align as much as possible to have best practices moving from local to European to national back. And I think that RGI, I know that RGI is involved with NSOE, is very, very important. And as said by Stephanie, a great thanks for organizing the event. And I wish you a nice summer.
Thanks a lot, Olivier, and thanks a lot, Michelle and Stephanie as well, our three speakers, for the insightful presentations and for the answers that you provided in the discussion today. It was a pleasure organizing this with you, and I think you left us with some great thoughts going out of this. Yeah, and we're happy that as RGI we can provide our part as well, and we will certainly continue sharing best practices on every level. So if anyone in this room wishes to find out more about the practices that we discussed today, please be in touch, and I'll be happy to share what I know or to connect you to our speakers today. Yeah, watch out for more best practice webinars coming in the future. And yeah, with this, I wish you all a nice afternoon, a nice week, and hopefully a sunny summer. Thanks a lot to everyone. Bye-bye.